Peter, welcome to the table. Thank you for joining us. I'm guessing that you want to start with an introduction or a bit of an overview, and then we'll move to some questions.
For sure. Good morning.
Thank you.
Okay. This is the annual resident survey for the year March 2019 to 2020. There are two parts to the survey. To sum up what the survey is about, it's not about a person or even the council as an entity. It's about the services we offer. So it isn't about reputational issues or any of those things. There are two parts. The general satisfaction survey looks at things that everybody in the city can access and does access, like roads. The second part is on specific things like getting a building consent, visiting a library, and that's where we have people actually contact those people as they're experiencing the service to say, how was that, what worked, was it responsive, that kind of thing. The survey's been running for about 20 years in its current form, longer in an earlier form. It's the biggest and probably the longest running set of feedback we have on the residents of Christchurch. It also forms the basis of some of our level of service measures in the long-term plan and our performance measures. The bottom line of the most recent feedback is that overall satisfaction with council services has declined from 62 to 50%. Underneath that is basically a rise in the number of people who consider themselves neutral or having no view. So this presentation will go into the highlights and lowlights of what's behind those numbers. Basically, of those who said they were dissatisfied, 39% they were unhappy with the services provided, and 21 gave lack of responsiveness as the driver behind their vote. The things that were council performed the best over the last year were consistent with previous years. So waste management, people love the bins. Libraries, parks and reserves, events and activities, and recreation and sports centres. Water supply somewhat confusingly turns up in both the positives and the negatives, and that might reflect places where chlorine has been removed versus places where it hasn't. I'm speaking at a very high level here. There's oceans of data under this. There's tens of thousands of data points. I would normally have Kath Jameson, who's the technical expert on surveys, with us to answer any of the more detailed questions. She's unwell today, so I'm going to try to handle both. Those areas needing most improvement, roading was the standout by a country mile. It's consistent with previous years. That has been a long-standing message about the quality of roading. I'll go into the details of what's under that shortly. Parking, footpaths, waste management, council decision-making and financial management are the areas for greatest improvement. Now, none of this has an immediate legal or financial implication, but there's been a clear drive from councillors in the earlier briefings on this to use this information both in the annual plan and as the foundation for thinking in the long-term plan. So there's no legal obligation here, but it's a very clear message from the community, and that should form a lot of the thinking in both of those plans. Just moving through into a little bit of the detail now. Excuse me. I'm moving to the overall satisfaction graph, which shows the trends over time. Interestingly, while I don't have the detail, Auckland's information has also survey information has also come out, and while it's not exactly apples for apples in the way they do their questions, it shows a similar downward trend as well. It's probably premature to say it's a nationwide trend, but there's certainly a widespread view that these results are going down over time across the board. It may have to do with people's expectations across the country, but putting that aside, the trend line from 2010 is clearly downwards. Now, that may be a coincidence. That also marks the beginning of the earthquake sequence and the whole confusion and turmoil arising from that. The clear thing for me looking at that graph is that neutral responses jumped from 11% in 2016 to 27% today. So they've more than doubled in just a couple of years. So I don't know, you might want to call that the meh factor. but that's a clear signal there. Maybe people are consulted out. I don't know, but the answer I don't know, or I don't have a particular view, has really gone up at the expense of a positive feedback. Just moving through to best improvement aspects. Areas the council delivers best, I went through them earlier: bins, libraries, parks. None of those are surprising. They're things we've historically been strong at, and the proportion there gives you some sense of highlights. Water supply historically was a little higher. It's always been a highlight. People love the water, but it's dropped a little bit on that scale, and equally has turned up in the areas for improvement, and that's almost certainly to do with chlorination. Moving through to the areas that need most improvement, you can see the really clear message there about roading. Underneath that, I'll jump forward, what lies beneath that result, the key point is make smooth, remove potholes. There is absolutely no surprise there, and that is 100% consistent with the message from previous years. There's also some points about better quality repairs, less frequent repairs, faster repairs. So this is a good example of the message that's come through loud and clear from the whole survey, which is better core services, more responsive. That, if you wanted to sum up 57,000 data points, they sum up as better core services, more responsive services. Roading is the example there. Water supply, I think I've spoken about earlier. Remove chlorine and other additives was the highest driver behind that. And then quality, smell and taste, which is probably also associated with chlorine. Then you go down into very small bits of data. As I said, I'm moving through these at a high level. I mean, if we did the line by line, it would take days. So, but we are very happy to address specific or detailed or technical concerns. Just contact me at any point and Kath can come back to you on those. Just moving through the other areas to address. Parking, more parking, better quality parking was the standout there. Financial management is complex because there's a whole bunch of things there. It's not just financials, it's decision making, transparency and understanding how those decisions work. The standout in that area is fuzzy. A better rates system is the standout. What exactly that means, I think you'd have to go into the verbatim comments. Underneath this bare shell of statistics are all the open-ended feedback comments from the ratepayers. So you can actually, if you want to drill into that, you can see what they meant by those numbers. Expenditure on unnecessary projects, and then down into sort of a smaller cut of rats and mice responses. That's probably the most blurry of the responses because it's a blurry subject, both decision making and financials together. However, it's a much smaller component of what they're dissatisfied with. Now, those individual service results go back to inform your performance reporting, and the annual report. They're part of the suite of performance measures, which are, in summary, generally things around quantity, quality, efficiency, responsiveness, and then lastly, perception, which comes from here. Following that are a couple of tables that give you the breakdown of the individual pieces of feedback, how they went as a performance measure, the trend over time, and the last 3 or 4 years worth of results, so you can see how they've been performing. Some of these are extraordinarily high, some of them are not. It's a real mixed bag, but it is consistent with the previous mixed bags. Now, there has been a lot of discussion in the briefings prior to this paper coming up. This is obviously step one in a much longer process around addressing what do we do. This is, I guess, to be frank, the take it on the chin moment. We've had a message. It's clear. The numbers are the numbers. It's about now the actions we take to address them, and specifically how we translate that into annual plan and LTP decisions.
Great, thank you, Peter. So now let's move to questions, but bearing in mind that we've had a briefing on this. The purpose of this is, as Peter says, the facts are the facts. So this is the opportunity to influence our decision-making and priorities in the annual plan, in the long-term plan. And Peter's already also made the offer that if we wanted to drill down into any detail, he's very happy to do that. But I'd like to keep any questions at a reasonably high level for the purpose of this discussion, realising that those opportunities have been had and continue to exist. So, Pauline.
Thank you. It's just on the targets not met in that last table you pointed out, and I'm just wondering, Peter, we've got the curbside collection, both the red and the yellow bins, target not met. How do we explain that? Because you put your bin out, it gets emptied, and you take it back in. How can we fail to meet that target? What on earth would people be dissatisfied with? I'm just struggling with that one.
I can't give you the exact facts and verbatims off the top of my head. It can be things like if the recycling is contaminated, it wasn't picked up, would be another one. We'd have to go into...
They couldn't be dissatisfied with us for that. Yes, of course it's our fault. Sorry, yeah. No, sorry, keep going.
Look, I think that's one where, to be fair on the science, I should go back and find out what the verbatims underneath are, rather than speculate on what the number means.
It's interesting, yeah, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you. And if any answers that need to be circulated afterwards, Peter, can be circulated to everybody, that would be great. Sure. Thank you. Anne.
Thank you. I'm not sure if you can answer this either, but so you've used phone, email and face-to-face interactions to gain residents' feedback.
Yes.
How do we guarantee that we are capturing a wider audience? Because there are some people who can't, read English very well, and there are others who haven't got access to email. How do we ensure that we're getting a diverse range of people feeding back?
Fair question. I wish Kath were here for the detail, but overall the spread of the survey is designed to cover both all the geographic areas of the city, but also all the demographics of the city. Now, I hear what you're saying about the technology. In the case of the point of contact, the technology is irrelevant. We actually use university graduates on their holidays, because they're nice and cheap for one thing, to basically go up to people with a clipboard and talk to them. So technology is not a barrier for that side of it. For the telephone side, I guess language would be the only barrier there, and Kath would be able to talk about how they deal with the language issue there, because the questions are complex. The survey 2 years ago was clocked at running something like 27 minutes, which is about as long as any human being will do a survey for. In fact, it's getting harder and harder to find people who will participate across the breadth of local government services. It simply drives a large survey. But look, the bottom line is geographics and demographics are covered. Your technology question could only apply to the non-contact survey, and Kath will be able to answer the detail on how they methodologically approach that. I can't answer that.
Okay, thank you. It would be good to know if organisations exploring other ways, for example, Facebook polls or even Instagram, to just actually get information back from people quickly.
A lot of the other surveys use...
There have been examples of that recently, Sam, haven't there?
Yeah.
Successful. But it would be good to know that those sorts of things were happening going forward to capture those audiences.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
Jimmy.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. My question a little bit similar like the N, because we review 1.8, those overall satisfaction in 2019 to 20, the satisfaction dropped from 62 to 50. But I just want to know regarding to the methodology of survey, whether it's exactly the same as previous year. If you emphasize, you separate two different category survey. One is a general purpose one. The other one is point of contact survey one.
Yeah.
So I just want to know, because general purpose you focus on, that's random, that's representative sample. But the point of contact one you emphasize is kind of the face-to-face, etc. Email, whether still random, wide range, or
No, the
whether methodology is my concern.
The methodology is the same. Both surveys have been run for a lot of years as separate surveys, so the recipe is the same.
Yeah, it's the same, whether we can see the white drop the 12%.
I'm sorry?
Because we dropped the certification reduced from 62 to 50.
Yes, but that drop is achieved using the same recipe as previous years, which is a mixture of the point of contact and general satisfaction surveys, which have always been run separately. So it's the same calculation method. I think we have to just take it on the chin that that's. However, we might look at the methodology. It's the same one, and if the results change, it's not the methodology. It's been consistent. The people are telling us something different.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Yes.
Any further questions? Yanni?
Thanks. Just 3 questions. One is, I'm just trying to understand what we're doing in terms of responsiveness. And I know one of the councillors and myself have raised the issue of we still seem to have a language problem when we get people's requests for service, where we tell them the job's been completed even though it hasn't. So I just really wanted to get some sense of what steps we can take as an interim measure to kind of address that frustration. The second question was, there was a hugely positive satisfaction with, I think, the bus exchange and the Riccarton Suburban Bus Lounge. And I was just wondering what that information, where that information goes in terms of, looking forward. And the third question was, although we've got the very high level, are we able to get some geospatial reference to where the concerns are coming from, so we can kind of see the hotspots on a map, if you like, which would probably give us a little bit of a better picture in terms of where investment could be directed? Thank you.
Okay, so just taking those sort of almost in reverse order, the geospatial one, I think we discussed at the briefing that the data is already there by ward, but the team is going to do a breakdown by a board view, if you like. So, yes, the geospatial breakdown is absolutely achievable. The questions on the transport stuff on the bus exchange, I believe, were part of the...
Well, that one. So at some stage, for example, when we get the resident survey, would we be able to see, I don't know, if there'd been 10 complaints in a street or a little area unit of potholes or roads, we could go, cool, there's some streets there that are generating a lot of complaints,
Okay.
and therefore we'll bring a project forward to fix it.
All right, that's a little bit different to breaking down the resident survey. That's actually the request for service data broken down by geographic area.
Yeah.
My team can't do that, but we can talk to the team that does. I thought your question was about breaking down the resident survey.
Well, it was to try and align the mechanisms of complaint to identify where we prioritise in terms of the frustration that people are going through.
I'm not sure what that would look like. I'm not sure how you'd overlay the resident survey with requests for service on a map.
Okay.
Yeah, well, as you get down to suburb or street, the sample size becomes invalid.
Right. Okay.
So,
Yeah, and that's certainly what we've heard before in response to similar questions. So let's move on to the next question, Yanni. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Let's move on to the next question.
Okay, so the second one was about the bus exchange. That data, I think, came from the transport survey and has been fed back to the transport team to address in their activity plan for the LTP. So that becomes one of the many inputs into how they set out their plan and budget for the long-term plan. And if you could refresh me on the first question.
So it was just there seems to be an issue with our marketing and comms, and then also our responsiveness around things like CSRs. And I know another council has also raised this issue that I've raised, is even the language we're using when people are logging complaints comes back and says, thanks for your job, it's been completed or it's in the system to be processed. And it's kind of, people get a bit frustrated
Okay.
So I just wondered what intermediate steps we can take to be more responsive to people when they're contacting us to get things done. And I was also, I mean, related to that, of course, was the criticism of our marketing and comms.
Okay.
Yeah.
Look, this is a complex answer, but it's a complex question. You can do things in the short term, in the interim, about trying to speed up requests for service. But ultimately, responsiveness comes down to what we've paid for. And what we pay for, in a lot of these cases, is contracts. And those contracts have response speeds in them. What we need to make sure in the long-term plan and going forward is that when councillors set a level of service on how fast we respond to something or how quickly we want it repaired or to what standard, that they understand that when they set the LTP and the contracts reflect it. In other words, we need to move away from the model of the LTP says you'll get what's in the contract, but the contract's off the page, you can't see it, it might be locked in concrete. And you can speed up and promise as much as you like. The contractor has a standard that he's got in a contract and he's paid for. So the long game is about making sure that contracts align with what council wants to do, rather than council gets what's in the contract.
Thank you.
That's the brutal, plain English answer of it.
Good. Yeah. Look forward to it.
Great, thank you. James Daniels.
Kia ora, Peter. Thank you for your report. I just missed at the beginning, you said something about it's not the fault of the organisation, it's the something, something, something.
Sorry, I didn't say fault. I said the survey is not a Gallup poll of a particular person or CCC's reputation. It's about the services it delivers. So I just wanted to be specific about what's being surveyed, and it's the menu of services, not the mayor, the CE, the reputation of the organisation. It's none of those things.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for that clarification. I wasn't ready to write it down. That's why I couldn't remember it, obviously. So, but the survey does reflect on the reputation of the organisation as a whole, doesn't it?
Yes, of course it does.
Yeah.
I was really trying to say that it's not a how successful is our image kind of survey. It's based around our services. But yes, it does affect our reputation.
Yeah. How do we do that, and how? Do we reflect on that? And
we've never been budgeted or asked to run a survey on outside the services we deliver.
yeah.
This one, as you can see, is really quite full, and it sounds like that would be a more specialised, bespoke kind of view of the world. You need to get the questions right. Lots of organisations do this. What's our image? Is it going up or down? But that's not what this survey is.
Yeah. No.
So if we wanted to do that, we'd need to scope it very carefully so that there was agreement about what we're trying to achieve, and we need to resource it somewhere.
Okay.
But
Thanks.
there's certainly no unwillingness to run these kinds of surveys. It's the power of knowing, you know.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Now, I know Dawn wanted to make some comments before we move on. Dawn.
Thank you, Chair. So I'd give some reflections. Having joined, in the middle of October, and our survey goes out in January. So the first thing I would say is this is a goldmine of information, and we need to treat it in that way. I think the reality of connecting what is coming out, not just out of the resident survey, but our customer service centre, all of our other surveys that we do in service departments. What we've done historically is we've done a survey and then it's there. Data is one thing, how you imply intelligence to that data is the key. So we need to look at linking those things together, understanding what is happening, and then feeding that in particular to the LTP. You've already started that for the annual plan in a small way in your discussions you've had in the last week, which have been reflected in what you have put in terms of the report that is coming tomorrow. But in my view, that is only the start. So the first thing I will assure you of is this. the residents' survey will absolutely be one of the deciding factors as part of the LTP process. That's an instruction I have given in the organisation, and we are building that in. But we need to understand that data, because actually stopping somebody in the street, as Peter has said, you're getting a particular point in time and a message. And I thought the bin example was a very, very good one, Pauline. It's really understanding what our residents are actually saying to us, and that is often complex and contradictory. We have to take that, and something I've been saying to you regularly now for the last few weeks, and I'm going to reinforce it, it is changing the conversation with our public about what we can and cannot deliver and how we go about doing that together. So it's that expectation management. The final thing I would say in relation to Councillor Daniel's question around perception, you're absolutely right. There's the reality of what a service, what the council's services are and how people see them, and there's the perception of it about historically rose-tinted glasses. 20 years ago we got this, today it's very different. I think in many ways it is. I am not a big fan personally of doing surveys about reputation, because I don't think that changes anything. This thing gives us enough to be able to actually utilise that to help us change how our public view us by working with them differently. So it's a commitment from myself, but we have a big tanker which for 10, 11, 12 years has been going like that, and we've got to find a way to start to make it do that. That's not going to be an overnight job.
All right, thank you, Dawn. So we've got a set of resolutions in front of us, which are simply to receive the high-level results of the surveys and consider the feedback as part of the annual plan and long-term plan deliberations. It's taken as read that we're going to do that, I think it's fair to say anyway. I'm keen to keep moving on because we've got a lot to still do today. Is there any debate on this matter before I put the resolution? Yanni.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, I need a mover and a seconder. I'm happy to move it. Mike Davidson's happy to second. Now we can move into debate. Thank you, Joe, for that. We prompt. Yanni.
Yeah, I think there's a few things that stand out for me in this resident survey. This just reinforces a trend that has been established, and I think you can go back to the post-earthquake situation. People were given the impression that we would have stronger, better, more resilient infrastructure in our city. In fact, the reality is far from that. In fact, what we saw was a huge reduction in the money that was required to actually fix our infrastructure properly. And now, as a consequence, our city is picking up the cost along with our community. And I think that's why you're seeing the huge frustration that infrastructure that should have been fixed properly post-earthquake is not being done. So we had a whole bunch of patch repairs. And what we're seeing is just the disintegration of that work, and it's kind of a shame because it would seem to be a lot of wasted money now that we're just picking up this huge extra cost because central government's no longer involved. So I think there's some really interesting things in here, but the basics being fixed properly post-earthquake I think is at the heart of it. The roads, the footpaths in some suburbs of our city are in an absolutely disgraceful state, and they need to be addressed. And so when people get when we have opportunities and choices around spending lots of money on big projects and we don't have the basics being done properly or well, I think it does create an opportunity for us to look at our budgets and to see where we need to spend the money. Because the other irony to this, of course, is that the longer our infrastructure is deteriorating and not up to standard, the huge maintenance costs we incur. And that's really a very expensive way to have a city. I think the other thing that I know we've got an external advisory group, and I look forward to considering the use of technology, but I just wanted to place on record, that for some of us who have been around for a long time, we constantly hear that we need to spend more on technology, and there's been a huge amount of money spent on technology, and yet we still seem to be in the same situation of not having technology that really helps us maximise the best spend of our money to addressing the concerns that local residents are raising. I think it was about 10 years ago that Jamie and I said, wouldn't it be great if a local resident could make contact, set up a unique ID on our website, log a complaint, have a unique number, and then follow it up through the process with regular updates. And we still haven't quite got there. So I'm hopeful that we can learn from what we're being told. We can improve the way we budget and prioritise, because this is very real to some communities around the level of dissatisfaction that they have against us as a city. Thank you.
Thank you. Jake.
Yeah, look, I just wanted to say that clearly this is this on? Yep. This is clearly a resident dissatisfaction survey, and it's pretty clear that we need to do better and focus on the essentials and make sure that we don't get defensive and that we're listening to what residents are actually telling us. I think it's pretty clear that some parts of council are doing really well. Everyone loves the libraries, the parks, but clearly roading and footpaths and Three Waters are where we aren't performing as our public would and should expect.
Anne.
Thank you. And just going on from that, I think that we've got large numbers in our community who don't engage and can't engage with this kind of conversation. So in some ways, for them, it's not there's no opportunity for them to give feedback. So I would love this organisation to take on the challenge to find ways to engage with all our residents. We've got a hugely fast-growing multicultural community out our way, for example, and they don't understand what council does, B, perhaps come from cultures where you don't engage with local government in any way. So there's a lot of work that has to be done to capture those people's voices. They are the invisible watchers on of the council and the community, and they need to be engaged. So I would ask the organisation to take the challenge to find ways to engage with those residents to get their feedback as well.
Thank you. I've got Jimmy and then Sarah. Jimmy.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, as an organization, continue improvement is most crucial and important. But how do we to continue improvement to recognize our customers, those the residents, all those ratepayers, what they need, what they want, what their expectations is very important. Now, staff down there, I would like to say that's amazing job. More than 8,000 the people feedback from us, from the community and residents. That's fantastic. My view is not only we receive this information, also probably need to break down to each committee, regarding to all those issues. We need to have the thorough, deep, to analyze how to improve, all the service. Otherwise, why we need to be the exist, and also we exist all our money, budget from the resident and the ratepayer. This the very the crucial. The other one is we reviewed the 1.8. This one I'm still a little bit the give us alarm, because if like the star mentioned earlier, if this is the same methodology, however our service general perception reduced a lot from 62 to the 50. This is big warning, It's yellow to red. We need to, as a council, we need to more working together to review deeply how to improve our service. That's very, very crucial. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you. I watched a part of a presentation. I didn't get the whole thing because I had another meeting on Tuesday night. And it was a presentation by Carl Davidson, who does a whole pile of research stuff and was asked to do research about Christchurch and talked to many residents around the city. He was a past Chief Commissioner for Families Commission and those kind of things. So he's got really good in-depth insights into the city. And he talked about a really cool, really interesting concept, the crystallisation of dissatisfaction, and how while people in the city can see a whole pile of the good stuff that's happened and some of the rebuild and the public amenity and other things, and acknowledge the challenges, they've just kind of got to the point where, nearly 10 years on, enough's enough. And they'd expected things to be better by now than they currently finding it. And I didn't get to see the end of it, but I'm going to go back and have a look. It was the Tuesday Club on Tuesday night, and it's available on their Facebook page. Really, really interesting research and a really valuable addition to the conversation that we've been having.
Thank you. Tim.
Thank you. Look, it's our staff work really hard right across the board, but at times I think there is it is interesting through being dictated to by the Independence Hearings Panel with our district plan. Some of the older suburbs that are kind of not central city but close to that are under pressure through traffic coming from the newer suburbs, driving through them. We've got this amazing vision of our city, but at times in our older suburbs, and this is a residents survey, remember, there is pressure. They come out of their driveways. Through the district plan there has been intensification, but the roads are the same. The keys for me from my area is traffic safety, and yet the budget that we have to traffic safety in urban areas to the big picture is almost nil if you're looking at the zeros. So I'm not surprised in some respects with this. I am disappointed that it's kind of aimed at our staff rather than the big picture. Everyone's doing their best that they can do. Key activity centres, I think ECAN, we've got to talk to them about the hub and spokes model didn't work and it was detrimental to the city. So I think there has to be more hand in hand with them with regards to that, and it's a learning process. I think between our community centres and our central office, there seems to be a disconnect or a misunderstanding perhaps, because our community board staff hear from our communities in my area, and I will concentrate on my area because that's what I know best. There are issues with the quality of our facilities and our parks. People love the parks, but there are ways that we can do this and work with community partnerships. I don't think we've probably, the definition between community partnerships and say further up the ladder than at the community base is different. So I think there are some areas, there is just some miscommunication perhaps or misunderstanding, and it'll be really interesting to dig down. But the two areas for me that are most concerning are the traffic safety in our communities, which without question it also includes the quality of the roads. But the other thing is the parks services, the actual toilets and the club rooms, etc., which we own and haven't quite got back to pre-earthquake levels. So it'll be really interesting to move forward on this, and I look forward to working with council staff on this and better connecting with our communities.
Right, thank you. So there's been a number of comments around the reasons why the results may be what they are. Certainly Yanni made some comment on the history that may well be a part of what's got us to where we've got to. My focus, and I guess it relates to Dawn's comments as well, these are the results that we've got. The challenge really now is what are we going to do to use the facts that are in front of us to inform what we do next to make the city better and to improve the level of satisfaction residents have got with the work that council does in the city. And obviously that feeds most immediately into the annual plan for our priorities and our decision making there. The timing is perfect in terms of it feeding into the early stages of building the long-term plan and informing our priorities and decision-making there. I think Jimmy's absolutely right when he says that we should look at whether there's something that comes out of this that should inform priorities in the committee work programmes, where there might be some improvements that we can take through the committees and concentrate on some of the areas that are brought to our attention through this survey. There may well be areas that we're already looking at as part of the annual plan and long-term plan process where we're reviewing not only the results of what we do but the way we do things, so reviews of service, reviews of efficiency, so that we're better delivering, quite possibly by using different methods or by changing the way we do things to deliver to customer satisfaction. And then I pick up on the point that Anne made, which is around the way that we engage with our communities and the way that communities can really have a good understanding and a good engagement with the work that council does, so that they can better understand and then therefore better comment on that work in a way that inevitably will be more valuable to us as we look to improve the services that people are commenting on through these surveys. So whilst I would have liked to have seen results that are better than we've got in front of us, I think we need to take this as a challenge. And I think we need to look at what we can do through the various processes that we're in control of and that we're driving to ensure that we listen to what the people are telling us, we make changes appropriately, and therefore we can look to improvements in the future. So, Peter, sorry, you wanted to make one further comment?
I'd like to finish on a positive note after a fairly sobering kind of experience.
Yeah.
Just to address some of the questions around the room very quickly. To Anne's point about those who may not be part of the conversation, this is an historic survey. There are other instruments. The External Advisory Group is working very closely with the comms team on focus groups, social media and other ways we can get input into the LTP that are not an old-fashioned structured survey. So that's one. Jimmy's point, we have to respect the feedback, but there is a question that needs to stay in the back of our minds when we look at all this, and that is, are people sometimes expecting the same in a world that has changed? It's not necessarily about what we offer, but where's people's mental space at? And lastly, links to the LTP. I can see some very strong feedback here that is not reflected in what's in the LTP. We've got June till December as a group to work through the plans and budgets to get that right. And that will largely involve making sure that what council sets as levels of service, especially around core services, what they deliver and their responsiveness, that those levels of service are right and they flow through to the people who do the work in the contracts. So there are mechanisms, there is the beginning of a plan shaping here around engagement, around the conversation and around the mechanisms to start to address this stuff.
Thanks for the further useful commentary. I'll put this to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against? That's carried. Thank you very much.